The story of America begins, not with glory, but with uncertainty. Along the Atlantic coast in the 1600s, small wooden ships carried dreamers, prisoners, adventurers, and the desperate. They built towns on unfamiliar shores, fighting disease, hunger, and cold. Native tribes watched with suspicion, sometimes offering help, sometimes fighting back. These colonies survived, but always under the shadow of the British Crown. For more than a century, the settlers paid taxes, followed orders, and bowed to a king across an ocean. But slowly, a question began to rise in taverns and farms. Why should free men live as subjects? The question became anger, and the anger became rebellion. On a December night in Boston, men disguised as Native Americans climbed aboard British ships and dumped crates of tea into the harbor. That splash echoed louder than gunfire. The Crown responded with punishment, but the colonies responded with defiance. By 1775, the first shots were fired at Lexington, and farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers faced off against the world's strongest army. The revolution had begun. George Washington, tall and steady, led an army of men with no shoes, no food, and often no hope. They marched through snow, wrapped in rags, driven only by belief. And against all odds, with help from France, they won. In 1787, leaders gathered to write a constitution. On parchment, they carved out a radical idea: that government should come from the people, not kings. The United States of America was born, but the promise was incomplete. Native lands were seized, women had no vote, and millions of enslaved Africans remained in chains. The words of freedom rang hollow to many, but the idea was powerful enough to grow. The young nation expanded westward. The Louisiana Purchase doubled its size. Lewis and Clark mapped rivers and mountains, while settlers pushed wagons toward a horizon they barely understood. But expansion came at a cost. Native nations were forced from their homelands in the Trail of Tears, walking miles in cold and hunger. The dream of opportunity grew, but so did the nation's sins. As cotton fields spread, so did slavery. By the mid-1800s, America was divided in two worlds, one free, one enslaved. Politicians argued, but compromise failed. In 1861, cannons fired at Fort Sumter, and the Civil War began. Brother fought brother. Fields became battlefields. Towns became ashes. Over 600,000 lives were lost. Abraham Lincoln, the quiet man from Illinois, declared that the nation shall have a new birth of freedom. Slavery was abolished. But Lincoln did not live to see the peace. In April 1865, just days after the war ended, he was shot dead in a theater. The Union survived, but the scars of slavery and division would remain forever. Out of the war rose an industrial giant. Steel mills, oil refineries, and railroads transformed America. Immigrants arrived by the millions through Ellis Island, carrying little but hope. Skyscrapers pierced the sky of New York, while fortunes were built by men like Rockefeller and Carnegie. But wealth and poverty lived side by side. Children worked in factories, families lived in crowded tenements, and Native people were pushed onto reservations. Then came 1914, and with it, the Great War in Europe. At first, America stayed away, but by 1917, it sent its young men into muddy trenches across the ocean. They returned home, changed, carrying both pride and trauma. The 1920s roared to life with jazz, flappers, and automobiles. Radios carried voices across states, movies filled theaters, and for a moment, it felt like nothing could stop the rise of the United States. But in 1929, the illusion shattered. The stock market crashed, banks collapsed, and the Great Depression began. Factories closed, farms turned to dust, and millions were left with nothing. Families lined up for bread, men searched for work, and the American dream felt like a cruel joke. Yet out of despair came resilience. New Deal programs, built roads, bridges, and hope. Then came December 7th, 1941. Bombs rained on Pearl Harbor, and America was thrust into World War II. Soldiers stormed beaches in Normandy, fought through jungles in the Pacific, and women built planes and tanks at home. By 1945, the war ended with both victory and horror. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed by atomic bombs, and the world entered the nuclear age. America emerged not just as a nation, but as a superpower. But the new power came with fear. The Cold War began. A silent conflict with the Soviet Union. Spies, nuclear threats, and propaganda defined the age. Children practiced hiding under desks while jets roared overhead. Yet, in this tense rivalry, America reached the stars. In 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon and declared a giant leap for mankind. At home, another battle raged. For centuries, African Americans had been denied freedom and equality. Now, they marched. Martin Luther King Jr. stood before thousands and declared his dream of justice. Protesters faced dogs, fire hoses, and prison. But they did not stop. Civil rights laws broke the chains of segregation, though racism lingered in shadows. The 1960s and 70s shook America. John F. Kennedy inspired hope, then was cut down by an assassin's bullet. The Vietnam War tore the nation apart as young men died overseas and students filled streets with protests. Music changed, culture shifted, and America struggled to find itself. By the end of the century, technology redefined life. Computers, satellites, and the internet connected the world. American movies, music, and brands spread across every continent. The United States was a global symbol. Admired, criticized, imitated. But history did not end. On a clear September morning in 2001, planes struck the Twin Towers in New York. The buildings collapsed in fire and dust, killing nearly 3,000 people. Smoke filled the sky as firefighters and ordinary citizens became heroes. The nation mourned, then turned to war once again. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in a fight that continues to shape the world. Today, America stands as both powerful and divided. It faces challenges of politics, climate, and culture. Inequality still haunts its streets. Technology disrupts old ways, and debates rage over freedom and identity. Yet the story of America is not one of perfection, but of resilience. It is a nation that has stumbled, fought, rebuilt, and dared to dream bigger than anyone thought possible. The history of the United States is a story of rebels who became founders, slaves who became citizens, immigrants who became leaders, and dreamers who became astronauts. It is a story of hope and contradiction, tragedy and triumph. And above all, it is a story still being written. In every protest, every election, every invention, every dream. Because America is not just a nation, it is an unfinished film. A drama unfolding with its best chapters yet to be told.